All right, thank you. And thank you for joining us today. This is a super important topic, and it's a two-part series. So I hope you come back next time for the elimination of bias. Today's training should be 1 hour of the competence requirement. And the second part of this training, the elimination of bias, will be about 1 hour for the elimination of bias. So a little bit about us before I begin. WorkSafe is an Oakland-based California statewide nonprofit. We work relentlessly towards systemic change to protect the dignity, health, and safety of workers. We do this by increasing worker power, supporting more protective laws for workers, ensuring just treatment for injured workers, and elevating occupational safety and health in the public discourse. We're the only statewide nonprofit that focuses on occupational safety and health issues and has a legal services component as well. So let me see how this. A little bit about me. I am Jora Trang. I am the Chief of Staff and Equity at WorkSafe. My pronouns are they, them. And I live in the Ohlone occupied East Oakland. Feel free to share who you are in the chat. I can peruse it while I'm doing this presentation, and I always love seeing who's here. Let me see if I can turn on the chat here. There. So I can kind of see who's here as well. We'll be sending important links and information in the chat too, so make sure you check it out. Okay, so what are our goals today? We want to build our capacity to understand the context of our clients' lives, and we want to build our capacity to understand how they and we interact within our legal system through the lens of cultural humility. So I want to talk to you about various aspects of cultural humility. The first one of which is that when we talk about cultural humility, what we're referring to is a lifelong learning and process of critical self-reflection. The concept of cultural humility focuses on your own personal experience and discovery in order to build an honest and trustworthy relationship with your clients or with other folks in your life. It calls for an in-depth analysis of disparities among different cultures and the interactions with the legal systems as they're experienced by individuals within various cultures. The definition, so there's a definition of cultural humility that's put forth by the National Institute of Health, and they define it as a lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique, whereby the individual not only learns about another's cultures, but starts with an examination of their own beliefs and cultural identities. We all move between different cultures, often without even thinking about it. Though the term culture is often used when describing different ethnic or religious affiliations, most people experience and participate in different cultures just by moving through their daily lives. So for example, a person's family or home culture will likely have distinctly different qualities and behavior expectations than their work culture, their school culture, or social group culture. Because the overall purpose of practicing cultural humility is to be aware of one's own values and beliefs. It's really, really important to understand that a person's values and beliefs come from a combination or intersection of the diversity of cultures that a person experiences in their daily lives. So the definition of culture, what is culture? It's defined, at least by the advanced research on language acquisition, as shared patterns of behaviors and interactions, cognitive constructs and understandings that are learned by socialization. Lots of big words there. We're going to break this down. It can be seen as a group, the growth of a group identity fostered by social patterns unique to the group. A popular way to depict this is through this model, which is called the iceberg model. It shows that culture manifests on the top in many ways, such as dress, language, and symbols. And the bottom of the iceberg are the invisible cultural aspects, such as assumptions and perceptions. These are often unseen, so building awareness is really important. I'm not so much a big fan of the iceberg depiction because it's very static, like an iceberg. Culture actually is quite fluid, and it has the capacity to change and be in constant motion. So another way to think about culture is that it's an ecosystem that is living and changing constantly. People within a culture are not monolithic. there's a great diversity within a group, as well as with respect to perspectives, values, and opinions and ways of being. So we need to be aware of these as well and how they affect all of those within the community. There are aspects that can be nurtured and nurturing to the community and culture that is below the water, as you can see in this picture. Like there's just so much going on in this ecosystem with the koi fish, the pond, the lotus, the flowers. In the same way, these things can also be challenging within the culture and outside of the culture. So in essence, culture is very complex, and the failure to understand this can make us or create or potentially reinforce biases. I want to make a distinction between cultural humility and cultural competence, which is a term that is sometimes used to refer to gaining an understanding of the diversity of cultures in our world and society. It might be an old school term for some folks, but it's still out there. Cultural competence is often referred to in terms of building a capacity or a body of knowledge and awareness to understanding minority or marginalized cultures in order to better provide services. Cultural competency was a tool for leveling imbalance patient-provider power dynamics. The shortcomings of this practice, however, have been identified by researchers who reviewed frequently used cultural competency measures. So what they found was that in many frequently used measures, whiteness was understood and represented as the norm. Cultural incompetence is then framed as being due to a lack of knowledge about the other. In short, the goal of cultural competence is to learn about the other person's culture rather than reflect on your own background. So this model often provided a goal, the gaining of which meant that you are then culturally competent or an expert. And so there are many challenges to this model, one of which is the notion that you could be an expert in someone else's culture or in understanding otherness. The others are that in this model focus on race and ethnicity while failing to understand the diversity in culture. So instead, we want to focus on cultural humility, which focuses on your own personal journey and your personal reflection and personal growth in gaining awareness. Cultural humility is different from other culturally based training ideas because it focuses on self-humility rather than achieving a state of knowledge, or awareness, or expertise about someone other than ourselves. So the best way for me to have you all gain an understanding of this is to let other folks share their knowledge. So I'm going to play this really awesome video that I love. And let me know if anyone has any sound issues.
With cultural humility, the goal is to lower your own sense of self-importance, to be open to receive other people and other people's way of life, to be present, to be listening, to be open, to see.
We are all equals and we each have skills to share. If you're talking about developing a partnership, I have something to give and you have something to give, and what are we going to create from that? It's not coming in as if you have all the answers because you're at the university, and I have none of the answers because I am from a minority community.
You have to be relaxed, you have to be humble, you have to come not to a lower level, but to a level that people can understand what you're saying, can understand that you want to be there. Body language. Body language is such a big thing. If you're not comfortable, then you need to go into a community with people that are comfortable so you can see how they act, what type of clothes they wear, how they speak to people.
Whether you're a professor, or whether you're a student or a staff person or whatever your station is, there may be this kind of sense, you know, within our egos that we need to approach communities that we're working with a sense of knowing everything, of being the teacher. And in cultural humility, it's okay to not know, and it's okay to ask a question. It doesn't mean that you're not intelligent. It just means that you may not know something. so I think it's just important to approach folks who may have different social identities in that way, with a sense of openness, with a sense of listening and really seeing, listening to understand instead of listening to talk and teach, and occupying the space of being a true learner. I think that's important.
Please remember that we are all equals and we each have skills to share. So even though we may not have all of the book knowledge that a university student has, we still have a lot of knowledge and skills, and we're still moving forward. And we need assistance with moving forward. And there's probably a lot the university students could learn from us too.
Right. So one thing I really liked about that was when the speaker said to occupy the space of learning. Cultural humility is about learning about yourself as well as learning about the cultures around you, the cultures in your community. So so you know, everything we've talked about so far, whenever I talk about it, even I feel like it sounds quite theoretical, you know, like what are you really talking about? How do I do this thing, you know, this cultural humility thing? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about some tools for how to engage in cultural humility. The second prong of this, or the second aspect, is recognize and challenge power imbalances. So the first aspect is self-reflection. We know that a person cannot begin to understand the makeup and context of another person's life without being aware and reflective of their own. And the second is to recognize power imbalances that are inherent in client and service provider, legal advocate, community exchanges. Power imbalances can really greatly influence our clients' legal outcomes. So it's really important to develop a true understanding of how power dynamics, implicit bias, and intersectionality of our identities dictate how we perceive the identity of those that we seek to help. Also taking into account microaggressions that we either experience or perpetuate. So a thorough understanding of all these things will help identify the different intersecting identities that can influence a client's case and will help build and strengthen the relationship between lawyer and client. In particular, cultural humility really requires historical awareness. It's not enough to think about one's own values, beliefs, and social position within the context of the present. In order to practice true cultural humility, you have to also be aware of and sensitive to historic realities, like legacies of racism, injustice, violence, and oppression. Now, it's really hard to think about these conceptually. So I want to give you all an example. I'm going to use the example of the increased awareness of anti-Asian crimes in the past 2 years to illustrate what I'm talking about. So many blame the massive uptick in anti-Asian hate crimes on the pandemic and the fact that scientists believe that COVID-19 originated from a region in China. They also attribute this rise to in violence to the last presidential administration's stoking of anti-Asian sentiment. I can tell you, however, as an immigrant to this country at the age of 4, and having grown up here for many, many decades, that I experienced racial violence as a Vietnamese American, as well as discriminatory acts regularly from the age of 4, which included being beaten up daily as a kindergartner and having rocks launched at my parents and having bullets shot through. Wow, is that a heart going up? I didn't know you guys could do that. It's amazing. God, everything is becoming like Instagram. And having rocks launched at my parents and bullets shot through our apartment windows. That was very scary. This has been a constant part of my existence in America. This is not a new thing. When I struggled as a single teenage parent through welfare, for example, my concerns and needs were regularly minimized as a result of stereotypes about the viability of Asian Americans who were all seen as a monolithic lump. A view which discounted critical experiences such as being a refugee, a victim of genocide, or the survivor of a war with serious mental health and PTSD in my family. So given this history, one can have understanding and empathy for Asian American clients that may come to us for resources and assistance. For example, there may be a pervasiveness of deep-seated fear, either for mistreatment in the prior country or mistreatment in this country, such as in the case of Cambodian and Vietnamese refugees who experienced fleeing from genocide or fleeing from a war. Silence can be a coping mechanism or a strategy of resilience. Also, there's the usage of or the minimization of issues experienced by clients because of the model minority myth, and a long history of Asian and anti-Asian sentiment. And all of these concepts are quite complicated, so I can't go into all of them. But some examples of the long history of anti-Asian sentiment that is important to keep in mind, for example, is the 1880s marginalization, an attempt to kill out Chinese immigrants, the so-called Bachelor Society, with laws and rules that prevented them from having families, from getting married. Other things that are that also make this all difficult is news coverage that fails to report the diversity of Asian Americans and their struggles. The blaming of Chinese Americans for the 19th century epidemics, such as the bubonic plague, that was really caused by other things, such as fleas on rats. The confiscation of property and the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, and so many more incidents that I don't have time to include here. So all these things and more are critical to keep in mind when we develop programming for particular Asian populations. In addition, you can't create something for me, a Vietnamese American, based on your study of, for example, Chinese Americans, many of whom have been in California for 6 generations, or Japanese Americans, many of whom have been here for 6 generations and who had their entire lives confiscated during World War II. You have to be diligent, sensitive, and specific to my experiences as a Vietnamese American. Okay, woo, look at this slide. So in addition, it's really critical to acknowledge how pervasive white supremacy culture is in dictating everything, from how we work and how we view work and the foundations of our values and belief systems. White supremacy culture has certain aspects that shape our biases, which in turn shape how we view other people's experiences. Things like the sense of perfectionism, the very first one. I'm not going to go through all of these because that would be a whole other webinar, but things like the sense of perfectionism, but perfectionism based on whose ideals or truths. The sense of urgency is another one, that things need to be done now, you know, and a prioritization of the end goal versus the process or the health and well-being of people. This has a profound effect on how we structure societal contracts, like work hours, for example, versus time for sleep and rest and to take care of ourselves when we are ill or injured. All of the things on this list contribute to systemic oppression, and they box us in, narrowing our views, our judgments, and how we conceptualize the possibilities for solutions for our communities or the communities that we serve. A thorough discussion of these various aspects is outside the scope of today's workshop, and it deserves its own webinar, actually, an interactive webinar to really flesh out how each of these affect us. But for today, it's important to understand that whether you recognize or completely understand it or not, white supremacy culture intrudes on our conversations with our clients and in our lives in general. We have to investigate how these things may be or are detrimentally affecting our ability to relate to others and to our ability to develop services that are inclusive, respectful, and reflective of folks that we want to represent, that we want to learn from, and that we want to partner with in their solutions. Even the way I'm talking about it, instead of using words like help, assist, do for, is critical. So the very last one is the aspect of institutional accountability. What are we doing as a society or as an organization to ensure cultural humility? We've all probably seen this graphic, so let's review it once more. What are we as individuals or what are our organizations doing to ensure equity and justice, and not just equality? So I'm going to talk through this image. In this image, the reality, which is here, is that some people get more than what is needed and others get less than what is needed. This creates a huge disparity that is systemic and generational. The notion of equality has an assumption that everyone benefits from the same supports and thus there's equal treatment. So we give everyone exactly the same thing, but we have different identities and different situations. So giving everyone the same thing doesn't address inequalities rooted in long existing disparities. Equity is the process where everyone gets the support they need. What this may look like takes into account how inequalities and structural oppressions have manifested in society. It's not easy trying to figure out what is equitable. It's actually very complicated, and it requires an interactive process that is sometimes quite time consuming and energy consuming, but it's so critical because you want to get to the final stage, which is justice. I've seen this graphic with this new addition to it, and I'm like, wow, this is like a sign that we're evolving, because in the beginning it was just like just these three. So justice has been added to the graphic, and it kind of represents a better understanding of what it is that we're seeking to do in our work to dismantle systemic oppression. Justice refers to going to the root cause of the inequality and dismantling or removing the systemic barrier. Sometimes this may mean rebuilding or recreating a better way of doing things. In a situation where justice exists, all individuals can benefit without supports or accommodations, because the inequality was addressed and the systemic barrier was removed. So now I want to take it to you all. How many people are here today? Megan, do you know? Let me know. There's a lot, probably 100. Oh my God. Ah! I shouldn't have looked. Now I'm scared. All right. So there's 100 of you.
You got to before me, Jora.
Oh no, I love it. I love that you're all here. So let's do this. Everyone go to the Jamboard, and so we can kind of share and see our own reactions. And this is all anonymous. We can't see who's adding what. And let's just do these first two. What time is it? 12:23. We got good time. I really want to give you all an opportunity to just put up here what you feel is more comfortable doing, but answer the question, what can you do differently to have more cultural humility? And I started you all off. I said, join community efforts and meet more of my neighbors. I live in East Oakland, near the Fruitvale Bar, and I love my community. It's very reflective of the community I grew up in. It's very diverse. But I can do a better job of going out and meeting people and hanging out. I'm kind of in my home a lot, kind of in my garden, not really chatting with anyone. The second question, cultural humility can directly, it's more of a statement, can directly benefit me, my colleagues and clients because, and I said, because I can share more about my community's experiences and listen to others share theirs with empathy. So go on here, grab a Post-it, it's over here, and just add something. And when you do that, spell it, spelling, and put save, it will show up. And then you could just put it wherever you want. So I'm going to give you all a couple of minutes to do that, and then we'll kind of reflect on what we put up here. Maybe 3 or 4 minutes.
I've seen some messages about people saying they've requested access to the Jamboard. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jora, but everyone should be able to access it now based on accessibility.
Yeah, everyone should be able to do it. So ask more questions, yes.
I'll put the link back in for anyone who showed up late.
So I'm seeing a lot of great things coming up here. I hope you're all taking time to also look at what other folks are saying. And I'm just gonna grab a couple of things and see what folks are saying here. What can you do differently to have more cultural humility? Let's see. I see join a community group. Listen more carefully. Ruminate on information offered other than seeing only through my lens. Think before I speak. Yes. listen with an open mind and heart. In terms of this think before I speak, I actually have some best practices. Maybe if we have time, I can share in terms of how best to listen and talk to one another. If we had a smaller crowd, we would actually be doing exercises. So continue to unlearn lessons from the intense white supremacy culture that is law school. Oh my gosh, yes. Law school is so painful. Thank you for saying that. Learn a language. When you think and dream in another language, it's like another world opens up to you. Ask more questions. Engage in active listening. Challenge the way my organization incorporates cultural competency goals into our work and services. Oh my gosh, need some upgrading there. I can create a more welcoming environment where my clients feel free to share their story. Yes, and how do we do that? I actually have a tool for you at the end of this training. It's called Courageous Conversations. Make it possible to work in partnership with clients on advocacy. Great, this is all great. And I want to open it up to folks for maybe 1 or 2 minutes. Can people speak on this, Megan?
People can speak on it. They just have to be unmuted. But I think more people want to edit the Jamboard, but aren't able to because of the amount. So I feel like if you want people to put some stuff in the chat, and then we can unmute those.
That's
people.
Fine. Yeah. If anybody actually wants to unmute themselves and share, we'd love to have more voices. No pressure. But there's 100 of you. So wait, there's 98 of you, and me and Megan. So if anybody wants to add their voice, please do so now.
Yeah, raise your hand if you do, because I think Jora, you or I will have to unmute them, but if they raise their hand, we'll know.
Okay, so Maggie can probably do that.
I can definitely do that.
I'm tech challenged today. So I'll read some more until Megan, you let me know if somebody's coming. Build relationships of trust, experience joy and connection. That's beautiful. I love that. Connect over similarities, appreciate differences, and learn from each other. We will be more effective in our work. We can hear each other better and work collaboratively. Great. All right.
I'm going to back to you, Jora,
okay,
for
somebody?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, great. Okay. So I'm going to do something that's really very, very basic. And the most basic that you can do to learn something about a culture that's outside of your own is to eat in a restaurant or eat their food. One of the ways that you can learn about people in general, and I'm talking about a restaurant that is true to the culture, not one that has bastardized their menu to allow anybody and everybody to
like
enjoy
fusion.
the food. Exactly. Talking about, go someplace where the faces are not like yours, and sit down and enjoy the experience and ask questions of the people who are serving you. You'll be surprised how welcoming they are and how willing they are to go ahead and teach and share their cultures with you. And that's like one of the very first steps that you can do, especially for people who are afraid, or shop in a grocery store that's outside of your realm, and that's pretty much what I want to say. Start very basically. It'll open your eyes as to other things that go on.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Yes, that's a basic thing. Anything else? Anything else anyone wants to share? Well, there's a question in here about white supremacy. Let me see if I could attempt to answer. I have a question on the white supremacy values. I'm just a little puzzled that white supremacy is described as embracing objectivity and rejecting emotions. It seems to me like I hear a lot of people who seem to me to be white supremacists reacting out of emotion. Oh my God, yes, isn't that true? And making emotional statements. What? Yeah, so right. Can we say more about how that determination was made? Well, this is something that I took from, let me see, where did I get this from? Showing Up for Racial Justice. And it is one organization's idea of what white supremacy culture is. And there are many books, White Fragility, and among many others. that probably go into more in depth. And so what you're saying is so true, but at the same time, I think what this talks about is something I will talk about a little bit later, and we actually have an exercise about, but since you're asking, let me jump to that. And then we'll come back to it in a second. I love it when people jump ahead of me. So what this is talking about to me, and again, you know, many other people may have different reactions or feelings, is that objectivity is prioritized, and emotional reaction is marginalized. So how this plays out is you might be in a, let's just say you're in a classroom setting, and you start talking about racism, and if a person of color starts to cry, for example, or starts to be emotionally reactive to the way that they have experienced racism in their world, their life, it is then kind of shut down or put down. And instead, the teacher might say, okay, let's just try to keep this at a very academic level, or let's keep this out of this emotion feeling level, and let's just stay in this rational intellectual level. And what happens then is that there's a prioritization of how you think and look at the world in a certain way, as opposed to taking into account the many diverse ways that a human being reacts to everything. And being emotional, actually, it's the white person that white fragility refers to a white person responding emotionally to being to having ancestors that might have been slavers, to crying, and then everyone kind of putting all their energy into saying, oh no, you're okay, you know, I know that was your ancestor, not you. So like you're taking care of the white person who's reacting out. That's white fragility, as opposed to maybe a person of color who might be getting emotional and talking about something that they experience. So that's what that refers to me. So hopefully that answers that question. All right, so I'm going to go back.
Jora, I unmuted someone before you answered your question, who I think was going to respond to your initial question about the Jamboard, if anyone wanted to speak out.
Okay.
That might be me. Testing 1, 2.
That's you.
Yep.
Hey guys, Rudy from Rodolfo from Legal CRT, and it's follow up on what Arlene said. And one of the issues I struggle myself because I'm Mexican American, and as in like immigrated from Mexico to the US, and I learned English when I was 16, so I have a really thick accent myself, and especially because my teachers were actually like English from England teachers. So I don't have the American accent, I don't have the Mexican accent, I don't have like what a Mexican accent is supposed to sound like, and I am in the front desk like really often. So something I struggle a lot is like people like, I can understand you. It's like, I'm trying to speak your language. I actually speak 4 languages, and like I'm trying to help you, but they assume that because I have an accent that I don't know what I'm talking about. So that is something I personally struggle a lot with.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So being really mindful of this notion that we have in America of the ethnocentricity of language, right? Some of the terrible laws that got passed that cut out bilingual education and workplace rules. It was like English only, you know, without understanding true complexity and diversity of people and how they experience the world through language.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Rodolfo. Thank you.
No, and thank you, Jora.
Sure. So I'm going to go back to my presentation. Let's see. So let's talk about a critical definition first. So what is it that we're trying to achieve with cultural humility? Many things, we're trying to achieve many things, but one thing for sure is race equity culture. This has been defined to be one that is focused on proactivity, counteracting race inequities inside and outside of an organization. There are other definitions of this as well. I'm going to focus on organizational for a lot of the rest of this training. Doing the work of cultural humility and race equity can be very scary, and we don't often know what's going on. Before I kind of jump into that, I also wanted to show an example that I found of gender equity as well. This is an example graphic by an organization that seeks to focus on gender inequity as a root cause for poverty. This is a concern worldwide, and they believe that by critically examining and challenging gender norms and dynamics, it will lead to greater progress in ending extreme poverty. So this chart is really interesting because to me, Megan and I were chatting about this, and also my daughter, who's really good. Who, you know, I'm from a different era, so I need my daughter sometimes to come in and school me. So we can see from this chart, for example, that the first square gender blind. First of all, the word blind is a little problematic, but is not inclusive of all genders, such as non-binary and genderqueer, which is what I identify as. And so as you process your work and you try to develop kind of the tools that you think are important for you, it's important to keep in mind that there are many ways, many things that can be missing in the work that we are, that we can benefit from exploring and trying to evolve and get better at our tools. So I'm borrowing from Equity in the Center. I already saw from the Jamboard that many of you perhaps also have dived into their model. There are many models, but I really like theirs. So exploring a model that works for your organization or for you is really critical. This example, this model has 3 different phases towards building a race equity culture. So it focuses on race equity. At the awake stage, organizations are focused on people and how to build a workforce and boards that are comprised of individuals from different racial and ethnic backgrounds to be more reflective. The primary goal is to be as reflective and inclusive as possible of the world, the community, and the folks that they are trying to serve, or reflective of their mission and values. At the woke stage, we're talking about organizations that are focused on culture and creating an environment where everyone is comfortable sharing their experiences and everyone is equipped to talk about race equity and inequalities. And the primary goal here is inclusion and internal change in behaviors, policies, and practices. At the work stage, organizations are focused on systems to improve race equity, and the primary goal there is integration of race equity lens into all aspects of the organization, internal and external. This involves internal, making sure that your systems inside, your salary, your promotions, your leadership structure, all that kind of reflects a race equity angle, as well as your work and the programs that you have, the services. So I really like this graphic from Equity in the Center because it kind of shows all the different aspects that are involved in this work to make it as evolutionary, transformative, and sustainable as possible. You need the commitment of senior leaders, the involvement of managers and the board of directors, and the involvement of the communities, whether that is the organization's staff, their volunteers, or the communities and resources that they serve or provide resources to. Other things that are really critical is data, making sure that you know exactly how, evaluation systems, whether or not what you're doing is achieving what you want it to, as well as an eye towards creating that kind of environment that allows for more discussion and transformation. So over here at WorkSafe, we are occupational safety and health heads. We think of everything through the lens of how to make your work safe more helpful and safe. So we view structural racism and gender equality as a hazard in the workplace. And by viewing it as a hazard, we use what's called a hierarchy of controls to try to control that hazard. This is a depiction of a hierarchy of controls. Sometimes you see this as a triangle. I like this bullseye because it's, I can relate to it better than a triangle. So the goal of this is to get into the center, and everything going out or outer, if you play darts, is the lesser, the least effective, the lesser effective. So when you play darts, where do you want to be, right? You want to be in the yellow. This is how you get that large free pizza, Out here is where you get that little plastic pinky ring, right? Or the little sticker or the tattoo, which is all great as well, but I want the pizza. So I kind of put the different phases, the equity in the center here. So for those of you reflecting on what your organization has done, I'm just kind of curious where you think you are in this. So personal protective equipment, I'm just going to use COVID-19 because you all know that very well by now. That's like your gloves and your eyeglasses and your goggles. That's like the least effective way to prevent you from having COVID. Similarly here, your anti-racist flyers, posters, emails, memes, and I'm sure you all have seen the statements of solidarity that have gone out, emails and email blasts. To me, that's all kind of here in the least effective. It's great. It's a good reflection of where your mind is at, but not necessarily the most effective. Administrative controls refers to like in the instance of COVID-19, it's like making sure you have enough people working at the grocery store so that they're all not crowded and exposed to COVID-19. In this situation, it's adopting anti-racist policies and practices in hiring, promotion, and project opportunities. Engineering controls, that's like the plastic sheet that you put in front of a grocery store worker so they don't get, it decreases their exposure. In terms of race equity and gender equity work, I see it as ensuring representation and starting a cultural shift, being innovative, for example, having shared leadership models, diversifying staff and board, and having a unique or diverse way to have boards members participate in a way that reflects their needs and their lifestyles. This is particularly important if you have boards where you're pulling in people of color who are on every other board, and also if hopefully no one's doing this, but tokenizing certain board members because they're people of color. You really want to look at how best to utilize people's time and energy. And sometimes the way boards are structured and the meetings and how the meetings work aren't the best ways. So for substitution, this was like substitution, I guess, for COVID-19 would be like instead of working close together, no, that's more of the engineering control. Working from home, I guess. Cultural shift for the world cultural shift, inclusion and internal changing behaviors, policies and practice, having race equity conversations, putting metrics in to define our work that are not white supremacy based. And then finally, the elimination of structural racism and gender equity is integrations of race equity into all aspects of the organization, internal and external. So that was a whole lot. Let's go back to our Jamboard and see where we're all at. Some of you already did kind of a start, but now that you know what I'm talking about in terms of the phases, why don't you throw in there? So WorkSafe is at the work phase. We start this process having courageous conversations. It was hard, okay? It's been 3 years. We have an extraordinary leadership at WorkSafe. We have great board members, and we're all kind of like working together. But I'm not gonna lie and tell you that it was easy. It was hard. So where are you guys at? Somebody says, I think we're at the work phase. Ooh, 3 work phases. That's great. 4 work phases, 5. This is amazing. How about other folks? Have you started diversifying the employees in the workplace, the staff? Have you started diversifying, implementing measures to recruit and diversify your board? Give you guys like a minute maybe to do this. Someone says, Angelica says, it seems less like a spectrum to me, more like you have to be doing it all or doing it all of it. No. So in terms of doing this work, you can be doing different phases of each of that awake to work to woke, you might be in the first phase implementing your different internal race equity infrastructure while at the same time recruiting board members, while at the same time having key conversations with certain people like leadership or whoever it is that you're comfortable with in the organization, or whoever's like some organizations have like a race equity committee that meets, so you could be doing different work in each of those stages. So it's not necessarily 1 and then 2 and then 3, but sometimes it is 1, 2, and 3. Not sure, maybe awake. Yeah, maybe we'll. All right, we'll keep filling that in. I'm gonna go back to our training. So let's, we got 15 minutes. Oh my God, this is the hardest part. You can't dismantle racism if you don't talk about racism. This is not the same as talking at it or at people about it. Like, you know, you have a staff meeting and you're like, okay, we're not going to be racist anymore here, or we're going to be more inclusive in terms of the way that we reflect gender equity. So I'm going to say that I'm genderqueer. What are you guys? It's not the same thing. It's not what I'm talking about. Okay, that's a start, but I'm talking about something more deep, more inclusive, more respectful, and you have to talk about it. You can't talk around it. What does that mean? Where are we? This training, we're at the very first stages. We're here. We're preparing to talk. A lot of people are like, oh, I'm deep in this. No, we're at the very first stage. And this is going back to what I was sharing about before. So this is called a compass of conversation. And it's a way to think of how we talk about things. I was explaining this before, but in American culture, there's a real emphasis towards like this academic, objective point of view, and it often alienates folks of color or folks who have experienced discrimination and disenfranchisement, because those are very emotional things that have happened to us and our families and our entire generations and entire communities. So keeping it all here in the head, intellectualizing it or rationalizing it is a challenge for people, and it's limiting. So we want to think instead of the many ways that you respond to a situation. So you can either do this in the chat or just do it in your head. Just think back to a situation that happened recently that involved either gender or racial inequality or some inequality that affected you or you observed. And think about your very first reaction. What was your very first reaction? And you can just throw it in the chat here if you want to, and I can give you an example, and then I'll have a little exercise that we can all do together. Let me see an example. When Barack Obama became the primary candidate for the presidency, what was my first reaction? I cried. My first reaction was I cried. I'm like, oh my God, there was just so much going on for me. And my first reaction was to just feel it. And I remember, for example, when he got elected, I remember seeing the news coverage, and there were people just bawling. That was their first reaction. Many of my friends, however, thought about it, like the history. They thought about the history of the civil rights movement. They thought about what this meant globally. He got the Nobel Peace Prize, that's action. And some people were like, oh my God, let's do this. Let's go out there and raise all this money for him. Everyone donated $5, $10 to his campaign. And then there were people who were believing moral, who were like into this, this can happen. We can change the world. We can change America. So there's so many different ways that we can react. And some people do a little bit of both. Some people are kind of intersectional in the way they respond to things. All right, so I'm going to do a little exercise with you. This is Shang-Chi, The Legends of the Ten Rings. I want folks to throw into the chat, what is the first thing that comes into your mind, your reaction, when you see this? Let's see, it's 12:49. Woohoo! Someone says, Angelica says, such a good Mooney movie, Kari said. I love the film. Okay, that's a heart soulful thing. All right. What else are some of people's reactions when they immediately see this? Heard it was great, but haven't had a chance to watch it yet. I do not know the actors. Yet another movie where an Asian is cast as the martial artist. Yes. What is this? Is worry, anger, fear? That's emotion, right? A little worried about stereotypes of Asians. Like, what is this? Like, you see some of these pictures, like the stances might be kind of like, martial arts oriented. Yeah, so there's worry and fear. And then some people are like, awesome representation. One of my favorite films that year I think I might not like it since I don't like violent movies. Thinking that's an intellectual thing. You're like, huh, okay, so there's some pictures here of fire and some electricity. Maybe there's some violence going on, and it's Marvel, so obviously there might be fighting. So a little of that, thinking about it. I was so excited to have an Asian American superhero. Yeah, so many different reactions. So let's go back to this this wheel and see where was I when I saw this poster. I was in acting. I was like, oh my God, let me go give Marvel my $20 and go line up at AMC and go see this dang movie, right? Similar to the Black Panther, right? When that came out, we many of those in my community, we inundated the movie theaters, right? We wanted. It's a little bit sad, I know. We're talking about capitalism here, and also the fact that it's Marvel, not a Black-owned Afrofuturistic company that put out Black Panther. But anyway, let's just put that aside. We wanted to show America and Marvel that a movie that focused on Black superheroes could be profitable. Everyone hit the movie theater. So the same reaction I had with an Asian superhero. I was like, oh my God, let me go spend my $20. Usually I would wait. Let's just be honest. The budget's hard. I would wait maybe a year or two. I'm cool with that until it came on TV or something. But I was like, no, let me just go show them the power of my money. So I was in the acting, by the way. So many of you had reactions that were kind of here in the feeling of emotion. You were excited, and some of you were angry or scared, some of you were thinking, oh, is it violent? I don't know. Is it yet another martial arts movie? I might have been a little bit in here too, thinking about, oh, this is going to increase the representation or reflection of Asian Americans in our culture. So many different reactions. So moving on to best practices, this kind of gives us an opportunity to practice when we go out to talk to people about how it is that you engage with people and directly address issues of culture and identity. You want to do that while understanding that there may be dynamics of privilege and oppression rather than avoiding them. So for example, when you're talking to clients, you might be in the position of a helper or the lawyer or attorney. So keep in mind that there might be a power dynamic there. Similarly, I think someone used the example of going to a restaurant. There might be some power dynamics in that. You as a customer and going in, there might not be, but there might be. So just to be aware of it. Do not take up space and expect someone to educate you. See it as a mutual exchange, and think about the many ways that people react, and don't judge them for it. Some people, like I said, their reaction along that compass might be immediately like emotional, but then they might go away and think about it intellectually and come back and chat with it. So keep the conversations going. It isn't a one-time thing, I hope. I hope you can engage in conversations with people that can be more sustainable, that can be evolutionary, and have conversations with people, not just at work, but in your friendships, at home. Like my family, we engage in these conversations quite deeply all the time. And each time we talk about it, some things move and some things don't move. Some things kind of evolve a little bit. But it's always an exchange so that we learn more about each other and our worldviews. All right, so I think I have 5 minutes left, is that right? For questions and answer or conversations, or anybody who wants to raise their hand and share more of their experiences. No more, oh wait, I see 2 more questions. Could you please share ideas on how to incorporate racial equity? Let me read here so you can see. Cultural humility in the performance evaluation process so that we can move away from performance metric that's centered on values based on white supremacy. Yes, this is a very good question, and also very challenging to do. Okay. it starts with work. So WorkSafe, 3 years ago, we had a new ED come on board, and I've been at WorkSafe for 12 years or so. And when the new ED came on board, he brought with, I don't know if Steven's on this call, but I'm gonna tell our business. But he had a lot of experience with race equity work in the past, and I was like, oh, let's jump on this, amplify this, let's build on this. And we had in our office somebody who has experience with academic studies and sociology, and so we worked really hard to create a different leadership structure at WorkSafe. It's a shared leadership model, which can be very challenging to create, but then and sustain. But it starts with that. So here you're asking about performance metrics. What is your leadership structure first? How does the hierarchy work in your organization? So if you have the kind of organization where staff members, workers, people that you supervise are afraid to talk to you because the hierarchy is so thick, the leadership structure isn't open, or it's not flexible, or there's many aspects of leadership that can be very scary to people who are not in that leadership. They're afraid to lose their job, they're afraid to be seen as incompetent, so many things. And so to incorporate more racial equity, cultural humility in the performance evaluation starts, to me, with going back to the root of how you structure your organization's leadership. How do you encourage and invest in leaders and leadership evolution? When you do that, you can then create performance metrics that looks at the whole person, because you've already restructured leadership. And so you're thinking about how can I incorporate things for growth in my performance evaluation that helps this person become a leader here in my organization or somewhere else. That's where it starts. To me, that's a very complicated answer because it's not easy. I didn't just give you one thing. You have to kind of start and dismantle everything and recreate it new. Sorry. That's my answer. Someone else might have something a little bit easier to implement. Do you have more examples of the first bullet, best practice? What does it look like to incorporate dynamics of privilege and oppression? The first bullet, are you meaning, Angelica, the worst, the least, the first bullet, the least, or the most in 2 minutes? You can put it in the chat. Do you have more examples of first bullet best practice? Or are you actually talking about the conversations? I actually don't know what you're talking about. I apologize. Directly, I'm assuming you're talking about this. Directly address issues of culture and identity while incorporating dynamics. What does it look like to incorporate dynamics of privilege and oppression? Okay, somebody said in the Jamboard, active listening. So I think listen with an open heart and mind. Look, you guys answered your own question. You don't need me. Listen more. Here's some right here. Think before I speak. Practice reflective listening. Oh God, you guys are amazing. You already know. Listen with curiosity. So here are some examples already. Take a step back. Well, we're gonna have a training on implicit bias. One way is also to really examine your implicit bias. Implicit bias is very challenging and difficult to change because it's in your head and it got put there when you're like in kindergarten or something. So it's 1 o'clock. I think I have to let you go. I hear Megan like trying to jump in, right?
No, I'm not. Listen, I am dedicated to the craft. I respect everyone else's time, but if there's any lingering questions, yes. Obviously feel free to answer them or email Jora.
Email me. Thank you so much for attending today. It is 1 o'clock. I'll stick on for a little while if you want to stick on and ask me some more. I'm not the expert. I've just been through it. So feel free to stay on.
I'm going to play our outro video, Jora, but I will not close the webinar immediately after if anyone wants to ask you some additional questions.
Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This webinar was hosted by the Legal Aid Association of California, also known as LAC. We are the membership organization for California's civil legal aid nonprofits. Our job is to advocate in the legislature, in the courts, and with the State Bar of California on behalf of the community of nonprofits that serve low-income Californians. In addition to our online and in-person trainings, LAC provides coordination and advocacy for increased funding to support organizations like yours. Thank you.